Holy Father's health. An update on Pope Francis as he continues to battle pain in his knee. Crisis in Ukraine. We have the latest, including the prospects for a peaceful resolution and reaction from the White House. Economic impact. Amid the ongoing military conflict, we assess the impact on people in the U.S. and around the globe. And fight for the unborn. Pro-life advocates in one Latin American nation protest a new law which expands abortion. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, February 28, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. As Pope Francis canceled a weekend trip to Florence because of problems with his knee, the meeting took place in his absence, and it included an appeal for peace around the world. The 5-day Mediterranean Frontier of Peace meeting of bishops and mayors finished yesterday with a document highlighting values and principles for the improvement of the countries surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. The participants also called for an end to the war in Ukraine. Joining us now from Rome is Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Andreas, great to see you. What more can you tell us about the Pope's health condition and this meeting where he was expected yesterday?
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Well, there have been indeed some last-minute developments with regard to the papal trip to Florence last week. It came at the same time as the conflict in the Ukraine escalated and Russia invaded the country and started a war here on European territory. We received news from the Holy See press office that Francis will not travel to Florence on a very short note. It seems that the Pope's knee problems have become worse. And as you said, he will also not preside over Ash Wednesday celebrations this week. Regarding Florence, the primary focus of his trip was of the Mediterranean refugee crisis. This has been a topic very close to Francis's heart that he has not grown tired of addressing. Also, his last trip to Cyprus in Greece was heavily influenced by the situation of the thousands of refugees trying to come to Europe. And Pope Francis's visit to Florence would have been the culmination of a 5-day meeting known as Mediterranean Frontier of Peace, attended by bishops from the Mediterranean countries in North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. The conference still took place, and EWTN's Catholic News Agency covered it online despite the Holy Father's cancellation of his trip. Everyone who has observed the latest public appearances of the Pope will understand that walking has become very difficult for him.
And Andreas, while Pope Francis canceled the trip to Florence, I understand he still went to the Russian embassy to the Holy See last Friday. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, Tracy, this is correct. And it's a small sensation, really. Not so much because of his knee problems, but because it seems that this has probably never happened before, that a pontiff is visiting an embassy to the Holy See. Usually, the ambassadors come to the Holy Father and not vice versa. The decision to go to the Russian ambassador and ask for peace bears great symbolism and was a strong sign. He also addressed this during the Angelus prayer yesterday on St. Peter's Square and found strong words saying that those who wage war forget humanity. They do not start from the people, they do not look at the real life of people, but place partisan interests and power before all else. Pope Francis criticized those who, and I quote again, trust in the diabolical and perverse logic of weapons, which was the furthest from the logic of God. They would distance themselves from ordinary people who want peace. In fact, Francis said that the ordinary people are the real victims in every conflict, who pay for the follies of war with their own skin. But you know, Tracy, over the weekend, there have been many powerful gestures by the church here in Rome to show support and solidarity with Ukraine. And the people in Ukraine have taken notice, as I've been assured by the EWTN office in Kiev.
Oh, thank you so much, Andreas. We appreciate your reporting. Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Russian and Ukrainian officials have held a first round of talks on finding a peaceful solution to the ongoing military conflict. The meetings were held in Belarus. Nothing was finalized in the discussions, but another round of negotiations is likely. Meantime, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with his economic advisors. In the face of tough sanctions from the West, the leader raised Russia's nuclear threat level, and he called Western nations, quote, an empire of lies. President Joe Biden spoke to U.S. allies today to coordinate their response to the war. They want to hold Russia accountable and support Ukraine's independence. This comes as Catholics unite together to pray for peace. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, President Joe Biden spoke with leaders from the European Union, Canada, and Japan so they could all respond together to Russia's aggression. And not far from the White House, people prayed for peace at a Catholic church.
President Joe Biden returns to the White House without stopping to answer questions about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But the topic did take center stage at the United Nations, which held an emergency session this morning.
This escalating violence, which is resulting in civilian deaths, including children, is totally unacceptable. Enough is enough.
The war in Ukraine continues to send shockwaves around the world. Western allies from the world's top economies are increasingly isolating Russian banks. Flights to and from the country are also severely limited, which may hamper Americans who've been encouraged to leave Russia. The UN Refugee Agency says more than 500,000 people have fled the fighting in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, here at the Arlington Diocese in Virginia, Catholics come together to celebrate a Mass for peace and justice in Ukraine and throughout the world.
We could be so easily overwhelmed, almost feel like paralyzed. What can I do at a distance? What difference can I make? And what we're saying today, and certainly encouraged by the Holy Father, is there's a lot we can do. And the first, beginning with prayer.
Bishop Michael Burbidge held the special Mass at the Cathedral of St. Thomas More. He told me it's important for Catholics to follow the example of Jesus.
God has united us as one family. And we are brothers and sisters in Christ, and we must be there for each other, especially when there is need.
The First Family is also calling for God's intercession. Jill Biden earlier tweeted, "Joe and I continue to pray for the brave and proud people of Ukraine. Our hearts are with our troops and our military families."
Also today, President Biden hosted a Black History Month celebration, and tomorrow he delivers the State of the Union address. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And joining me now is Mike Baker, former CIA Covert Operations Officer and CEO of the global intelligence firm Portman Square Group. Mike, welcome back. Always so great to see you. As we mentioned, talks began between Russia and Ukraine today, but the meeting ended with no resolution. What do you expect, if anything, to come from the future meetings?
Well, I think most people are cynical or pessimistic about what could come from these discussions. But to be honest, talk is good. And if that dialogue, if that channel of communication remains open, that's a very good thing. So we don't want to, we don't want to be too dismissive of it. It's just that, given Putin's behavior and actions to date, the chance that he would come to the table in good faith or looking for a ceasefire without ridiculous and onerous demands, it seems unlikely.
Yeah, Mike, I want to ask you, the last time you and I talked, I know you didn't really seem convinced that Putin would actually launch this, full-scale invasion into Ukraine. What do you think changed?
Well, I think, we always had to leave open the possibility that he was going to, at the end of the day, do what he's done. It's the idea, early on, was that he was looking for concessions and was basically involved in a gambit here. It was putting all his cards on the table by massing all those troops with the intention of stopping short of a full-on military invasion of the country, perhaps just stopping in the eastern side. As far as what's changed, some people have talked about the change in Putin's personality itself, right, and how he seems to be behaving in a more rash, irrational manner. I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, is to assess his personality. But in a sense, if you look at what he's doing now, it's an escalation. It seems irrational. It's an escalation, though, of his behavior since 2008 or so. So I guess you could argue, in a sense, he's consistent with his actions, whether you're talking about Chechnya, Crimea, Georgia, previous incursions into eastern Ukraine. So, he does seem to be a little bit off the logic train in that he doesn't seem to care what happens to his people, despite the fact that he continues to claim he's doing this to protect the Russian people, which, of course, is nonsense.
Yeah. Speaking of escalation, as you know, over the weekend, the Kremlin put Russian nuclear forces on high alert. How serious is this, Mike, and how concerned should we be?
Well, it's very serious in the sense that, he has chosen an unnecessary step, and he's yet again doing the same thing that, as an old KGB officer, you would expect him to do, which is just keep throwing disinformation into the pot and hoping that people buy it. But saying that he's going to put his forces, nuclear forces, on a state of alert in response to aggressive statements and behavior from the West is almost as nonsensical as his claims that he's denazifying the Ukraine. If he keeps on this path, I guess more and more people will actually make the assumption that, he is behaving in an irrational manner for whatever reason. But it is a serious matter. Look, and it's got, I think, in a sense, is he doing it to gain leverage in these discussions? Is he doing it because he throws that out there and he assumes the West will take note, become rattled, and try to pressure Ukraine into capitulating to what Putin may be demanding? It's speculation.
Yeah, Mike, another thing I want to talk about is how what's happening in Ukraine is sort of playing out around the world. We saw North Korea over the weekend shoot off a missile. A lot of concerns about China and Taiwan. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, North Korea always has to be kind of looked at in its own separate category. They tend to, whenever they feel as if they're not getting attention, not to oversimplify it, but they tend to throw their teddy out of the crib and often fire off a missile when they feel as if focus is not being paid to them. The attention is not being paid. So I would put North Korea in a separate category at this stage and lower the concern there necessarily, because that's a consistent activity for them. China is a different matter here. Of course, Xi has been watching this. Of course, Xi has a timeline in his head about Taiwan. Taiwan is actually, not to sound mercenary about this, but Taiwan is strategically more important to our interests, our national security interests, and to that of the world. That doesn't diminish at all what's happening in the Ukraine and the problems there and the bravery of the people. But I think the one thing that we could be looking at here and assessing, and a lot of people are doing that currently, is the behavior, the reaction of the Russian public, of the Russian people themselves. And there has been some talk, and there's been some demonstrations in the streets. Putin's forces have arrested most of the protesters that have come out on the street in a very brave attempt to denounce what Putin's doing. But I think a large-scale public uprising in Russia against Putin's actions here is about the only thing that would bring him to an immediate halt. Because at the end of the day, what he's most worried about is losing public support and losing control over his population. And that is also the one thing that Xi is most concerned with. So if that were to happen in Russia, it would have a knock-on effect with Xi. He would look at that, and it would likely temper his thinking about a timeline towards Taiwan.
Yeah. Well, we will see what happens. Mike, thank you so much. Always appreciate your analysis.
Sure. Thank you.
Coming up, costs of combat, the global economic impact from Russia's military incursion into Ukraine. Plus, State of the Union. We preview tomorrow night's address from President Biden. The Biden administration levies more sanctions against Russia. The sanctions effectively stop Americans from doing business with the Russian central bank and freeze the bank's assets within the United States. This comes as Norway announces it is divesting its Russian assets that totaled over $2.8 billion at the end of 2021. And joining me now is Anthony Cannizzaro, Associate Professor of International Business at Catholic University of America. Tony, welcome back. Great to see you. Let's talk more about this recent decision by the Biden administration. Tell us, how will freezing out the central bank impact Russia's economy?
Well, so to understand what's happening, in the past few years leading up to this invasion, Russia has amassed over $600 billion in foreign reserves. When we say reserves, this could be foreign currency, highly liquid foreign securities, gold, and these reserves are intended to hedge this against the sanctions risk that Russia knew was going to follow when it engaged in the invasion. It works like this. Sanctions damage the Russian economy, which in turn will devalue the ruble. The central bank then uses the reserves to prop up the value of the ruble, dulling the bite. By preventing Russia's central bank from trading these reserves, there's now little they can do to prevent the ruble from going into free fall, and we've seen this. The ruble is now trading at record lows. I think it's less than a cent per dollar. And while Russia is a large exporter of petroleum, the Russian economy is highly import reliant on ordinary goods. So this is going to cause a lot of inflation for the regular Russian consumer.
You mentioned energy. I want to talk about that. As you know, Germany halted progress on Nord Stream 2. But how much of a hit is that going to be on Russia's economy? I know there's also Nord Stream 1 that's still sending a lot of natural gas into Germany. Yeah,
so it's interesting. This is really a very interesting turnaround for the German chancellor. Europe, as you know, is highly dependent on Russia for energy, and Russian natural gas in particular, especially for heating homes in the winter. It supplies about a third of Europe's natural gas. Nord Stream 2 expanded on the original Nord Stream pipeline. It was about an $11 billion project. So it's not going to stem sort of existing flows of natural gas to Europe. But what we're really talking about is in expediting Europe's transition off of Russian energy. Germany historically has been sort of one of the holdouts for transitioning away from Russian energy, while other European countries don't rely as much on Russia. Over half of German natural gas comes from Russia. So this is, in the near term, maybe not as big of an issue, but sort of a sea change for the way that European energy is going to be working moving forward.
Yeah, I want to talk about here at home. President Biden has mentioned several times that we can expect to see really higher gas prices due to the conflict that we're seeing. I want to get your take on that, and also, what else do you think we should brace ourselves for here in the United States?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely right. The U.S. consumes about 20 million barrels of oil a day. And while we're the largest exporter of oil in the world, we still only produce about half of that. So we're very sensitive to these sanctions on Russian oil. As many people know, Russia's primary export is oil. It represents about 12% of global trade in crude oil, or 2.3 million barrels a day. So we're definitely going to see upward pressure on prices. I was reading a JP Morgan analysis earlier this afternoon projecting that if we remove 2.3 million barrels, that's going to take us to about $150 a barrel. Some of this could probably be offset if U.S. shale producers brought online some of the capacity that went offline during the pandemic. And this could be bolstered further if the Biden administration started issuing permits for some existing sites, which it's been sitting on until now. Still, this would only bring a little bit of capacity on in the near term, not nearly enough to cover 2.3 million barrels a day.
Something else I want to talk about, we have less than a minute or so left, but the last time you and I talked, I know you discussed how the supply chain disruptions were impacting U.S. consumers. What type of impact do you think this crisis in Ukraine could have on things?
Yeah, so we're definitely going to see some inflationary pressures with what's happening in oil. But that's not the only commodity that we're seeing from that part of the world. Russia is the world's largest wheat exporter. Ukraine is also a significant exporter of wheat, corn, and other foodstuffs. Together, they produce nearly a quarter of all the world's wheat supply. The overall impact is going to be hard to gauge, but weak futures have increased dramatically since this time last week, signifying that markets really expect some inflation in this area. So I think we're going to expect food prices to be going up.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for weighing in. We always appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, as Owen mentioned, President Joe Biden delivers his first State of the Union address tomorrow. Democrats say that he will talk about his accomplishments. Republican Congressman Jim Jordan tells EWTN News Nightly his expectations are low.
It's always an important day, but unfortunately, I don't know what positive things the president can talk about. Across the board, things have been terrible this first year, whether it's the border, whether it's crime, whether it's inflation.
The president's State of the Union address takes place Tuesday night. Iowa Governor Kay Reynolds will give the Republican response. The Senate today voted not to proceed to the House-passed Women's Health Protection Act. The bill would make abortion on demand legal up until the time of birth. It would also nullify any state laws restricting abortion. Republican Congressman Kat Cammack tells EWTN News Nightly abortion is the defining issue of our time.
This isn't about a pro-life, pro-choice. This is murder, and we know that. There's so many opportunities for us to take a stand and uphold our constitutional oaths to defend life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but it all starts with life.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops opposed the bill. Part of their statement adds all that the bill does with respect to abortion would apply equally to other services, potentially to include contraceptives and sterilization. EWTN's CEO is calling the Women's Health Protection Act, quote, worse than Roe. Addressing the proposed act, EWTN Chairman and CEO Michael Warsaw writes in a publisher's note in the National Catholic Register, this bill would nullify every single state law regulating abortion. That includes state laws that limit painful late-term abortions and laws that prohibit abortions from being performed because of the race, sex, or condition of the child. It would even end basic informed consent laws. The full text of Michael Warsaw's editorial is online at ncregister.com. Up next, eyeing Lent, a papal primer from Sunday's Gospel as we prepare for Ash Wednesday. Plus, Catholics in Ireland venerate a World War I relic. In Buenos Aires, Sunday Mass at the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church included an urgent call for peace. Mass was celebrated in the Cathedral of Our Lady of Patronage. Argentina is home to a large Ukrainian community since the 19th century. One of the worshipers expressed heartache for friends and relatives who are still in Ukraine. In Vienna, talks resumed today over Iran's nuclear program and the 2015 international agreement. The U.S. has waived enforcement of some sanctions to restore Iran's compliance with the pact. Iran's delegation was returning to the table after weekend consultations in Tehran. All pro-lifers in Colombia are protesting a ruling by the country's high court to expand abortion access. Thousands marched in several cities yesterday to express opposition to last week's ruling, which legalized abortions up to 24 weeks. A Catholic nonprofit organization seeks the resignation of the judges who approved that law. Pope Francis notes people are the real victims who pay for the follies of war with their own skin.
Chi fa la guerra dimentica l'umanità.
At his Sunday address, the Holy Father said to the pilgrims that we must be capable of seeing our own weaknesses, or we will tend to only see the faults of others. The Pope also renewed his invitation to all to participate in the March 2nd Ash Wednesday day of prayer and fasting for peace in Ukraine. And finally tonight, Catholics in Ireland are now able to venerate for the first time a relic from Father Willie Doyle, a revered Jesuit chaplain who died while ministering in the trenches of World War I.
This is one of his own personal crucifixes and probably the one that he had with him in the trenches in the First World War. It's a little bit battered, probably a bit like Willie himself in the trenches. We, of course, don't have Willie's body. It was destroyed in the war. So any of these items that he owned are very precious connections with him and a very precious relic that connects us with him.
Dr. Pat Kenny is the author of To Raise the Fallen, which is an anthology of the letters of the late Father Willie Doyle. Our thanks to our colleagues at EWTN Ireland for that story. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.